Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Natalie Hinkhouse, and I am the Executive Coordinator for the Plant Science Research Network and at the American Society of Plant Biologists, which is a member of the National Coalition for Food and Agriculture Research. I am pleased to moderate today's webinar. For the third time in over 150 Lunch and Learn seminars on the Hill, we are welcoming you to this virtual Lunch and Learn seminar via a webinar. As we are all dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic and safe distancing practices, this is our approach to continue serving as a resource to Hill staff, agency officials, and other interested stakeholders until we are able to gather again in person on the Hill and to share food and knowledge. In terms of protocol, all participants' microphones are on mute to help ensure the quality of the presentation. You are invited to post your questions at any time during the webinar in the chat feature. We are monitoring these questions and will work through as many as we have time for at the end of the presentation. We also welcome your feedback about this virtual seminar approach. NCFAR is a consensus-based and customer-led coalition that serves as a forum and a unified voice in support of sustaining and increasing public investment at the national level in food and agricultural research, extension, and education. Our seminar series feature leading-edge researchers discussing their work and in meeting 21st century challenges and opportunities, and providing timely information that may prove useful in your own work. I would like to take this opportunity to recognize our contributing sponsors whose financial support makes the seminar series possible. One of our commitments is to end the program on time as advertised, and out of respect for your time and your busy schedules, I've asked our speakers to finish the presentation by 1:05 Eastern to allow for time for your questions and a discussion. From the GoToWebinar control panel, you may also download the Decadal Vision handout and presentation slides. The presentation will also be available at ncfar.org. I would like to start this presentation by acknowledging today's work is a culmination of 5 years of an NSF-funded project called the Plant Science Research Network. The network currently includes 15 societies, councils, and associations. Additionally, the ideas for the Decadal Vision were developed at a facilitated retreat called the Plant Summit 2019, which was held in February 2019. We would like to acknowledge the summit participants for their contributions to the Decadal Vision, which is intended to unite, inspire, and enable the plant science community. Now it is my privilege to introduce Dr. Samantha Miller, who is the Agronomy and Information Specialist at Beck's Hybrid. Sam, can I advance the slide for you?
There we go. Yeah. So, Natalie, I really appreciate the introduction. And by way of introduction, I'd like to invite everyone to this picture and reflect a little bit. What is this a picture of? I think Natalie's got a couple of polls set up for us. So as you look at this picture, thinking, you know, what's this a picture of?
All right, I'm going to launch the first poll.
How many species of primates were in that picture that we all just saw? We'll give you a few seconds to log your vote. Hopefully everyone's logging. Natalie, I don't know if you can see how many we've got.
Yeah, we've had about 50% voted so far, so I'll just give another minute.
Not bad for a local election. All right, let's go with our second question. Maybe we'll get the answer to that first one.
Great. Launching that now.
How many species of plants are in that picture?
About 50% are in.
We've learned to work more quickly. Perfect. We can capture what we think is there, Natalie. So Natalie, as we look at this picture, now we're going to think back on those two questions. Natalie, are you able to see the readout of those polls?
Let me see. And actually, Katie,
there we go.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so the result of how many species of primates. Most people noticed that there were at least 2 different types of primate there. Our eyes and our brains have become acutely aware of how do we process and categorize animals. We're accustomed to looking at vertebrates. We like to look at things that have 2 eyes and can look right back at us. Let's look at the next picture, or the next result. There we go. How many species of plants? 97% said 4 or more. So I'm very proud of you. Everyone who self-selected to attend this webinar, you are very plant aware. And that's something that we as a discipline and as a team of people who came together to form the Decadal Vision, we are working to make sure that members of the public are plant aware. And something that we find is that often people who are asked this very similar question, and that is a kind of famous picture that's been used in similar demonstrations previously. A lot of times adult Americans will simply say, oh, there was some green stuff, right? And what we want to do is really bring to life and emphasize the role of that green stuff, the background, in each of our lives every day. So I have the privilege of working for Beck's Hybrids, and I don't know if you have heard of us before. We are a Midwestern seed company. We operate in 15 states. We are the largest family-owned seed company in the United States, and altogether the 3rd largest corn and soybean brand here in the United States, even though we only market in the Midwest. So it's really important for me, Natalie, if we could advance, oh wait, maybe I'm doing it. Yep, I'm doing it. So proud. It's really important for me, my role here, and the success of our company to have a really robust talent pool. We are a growth company. We hire over 100 people a year, which doesn't sound like much until you realize we only have 700 employees today. Next year, we plan on hitting 800. And a lot of those roles are going to require very basic training in what becomes the plant sciences. And I don't want you to think that the plant sciences are simply production agriculture. This goes far beyond our production agriculture crops. We are looking at how do we harness the mechanisms of plants to improve quality of life for all humans on Earth. So the Decadal Vision is really saying, how do we unify both production ag, basic research, education, quality of life, and green infrastructure? How do we take each of those facets and bring them together such that we can have a robust group of folks who are interested in working in the plant sciences in varied and interesting ways? So that's going to range everywhere from data scientists, molecular biologists, geneticists, and we're also going to have someone out there under the sunlight and walking on the soil, studying how we do this in production systems. So I'm excited. I want to welcome each of you into our webinar. We're so excited to share our discipline with you, and we want to share with you a vision of what we hope to accomplish in the next 10 years. I get to introduce our next speaker, Dr. David Stern, and he's the CEO of the Boyce Thompson Institute, and he's an adjunct professor at Cornell. He studies one of the coolest mechanisms on the entire planet. So everybody take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. You just did the opposite of what a plant does. So what these plants are doing is sucking this carbon down out of the atmosphere and making it into useful compounds. And Dr. Stern has spent his career studying the mechanisms that allow a plant to do that efficiently. Dr. Stern, can you tell us a little bit about that decadal vision? Where's the plant sciences going to be as a discipline in 2030?
Am I live?
You are, loud and clear.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks for that introduction. And thanks for getting us all excited. You kind of look like a plant, a very excited, happy plant.
Yeah. This is a chlorophyll themed dress, just so everyone knows.
Yeah, I'm a cornfield from 200,000 miles out in space, I guess, at night. Well, I want to thank people for coming, so to speak, to this webinar. Looks like great attendance, and I hope people are here because they want to know about the future of plant science. And that's why we had the Decadal Vision, the Plant Summit exercise, was to find out what the future is. We brought together a very diverse group of people, and I mean that in many ways: early career, mid-career, late career, small schools, big schools, industry, really an exciting range of people with an exciting range of ideas. And we didn't all agree on everything, but the Decadal Vision that we came out with is a consensus document. And I'm going to take it through it at a very high level. We are going to publish it. It's in the works, so it's in the actual production stage. And if you want more information, not only does the Decadal Vision itself have information, but it's intensely footnoted, and there's a lot of resources, links to government documents, and other things, so that if you're interested in a particular area, there's always somewhere to go for more information. Also, we had a number of questions submitted in advance of the webinar, so we want to be sure we give plenty of time for questions and discussion. Now, the overarching vision, if you will, is not one entirely made up of research. It's very common for scientists to get together and talk about research, but research is done by people, and research requires technology. So how are these different things related? And this is one thing that's explored in the Decadal Vision. You can't have a vision and realize it without paying attention to all of these three elements. So in the 8 goals of Decadal Vision, they're shared between research, people, and technology. And again, we argue that one cannot advance one without the other. And to Sam's discussion of the workforce, of course, they're the people. But what are they going to be trained in? They're going to be trained on technology, and they're going to be trained by doing research. So all of those things work together. Now, these are the areas that I'm going to cover, again, at a very high level, that are in the Decadal Vision. And I'm not going to read these circles off to you, but they're what we're going to walk through here, again, at a high level. And please come in with the questions if you'd like to know more. But I think just glancing at these titles, you realize how diverse plant science is in the way that our PSRN coalition thinks about it. So one of the major goals of the Decadal Vision is what we call plants for planetary resilience. And this reminds us that plants are everything to us. You take them away, there's no oxygen. Sunlight can't be captured and turned into energy, into sugars for things that we eat and for the houses that we live in. But plants are all around us, and the risk to our biodiversity has never been more profound with climate change and other pressures on the climate. So ecologists were a big part of our coalition in the Plant Summit, and they have big ideas for cataloging and mapping diversity. So there are many, many thousands of undiscovered species of plants and things that live on and around plants. We don't know much about them. We don't know where they are, what they do, how they interact with each other, what their chemistry is. And we need to know all of these things. All of that knowledge needs to be integrated, meaning that computational people have to take all those different kinds of information and deduce what the ecosystems are thinking, what pressures are they under, and what is going to happen in the future. So the idea is to be able to predict things that will happen in ecological niches, things that will happen in evolutionary biology, and if they're going to be harmful to the planet, harmful to our ability to be sustainable, how do we mitigate them? So again, a lot of information, integrate it, use it to be able to predict and mitigate. And buried in that is a huge amount of discovery. We'll learn about the diversity of life around us, how that diversity interacts with each other and with the environment. And that's one of the really cool things about science that draws people in the first place is the unknown. So let me go to the next slide here. Okay. Natalie, can you change that, or Katie? It doesn't seem to be moving. Thank you very much. So this second goal in the research area is what we call novel plant production systems. And so this is largely about agriculture, but not agriculture as it used to be, but agriculture as it will be, we think, in the future. So first of all, we have all of these tools of plant modification that are very, very different from things that were available even 5 or 10 years ago. You've all heard about gene editing, this very precise way of changing one letter at a time in a plant to change its properties. You've heard perhaps about synthetic biology, which is essentially creating new pathways, new capabilities in a plant that have never been there before. And plant breeding is much more than walking through a field looking for the biggest ear of corn or the tallest wheat plant. It's now a molecular process that is done with extremely high computational power and is being rolled out across the globe to help people provide in their own societies. That's one element of plant production, is these new tools. The second is really to create new crops. It's amazing how narrow our source of calories is on this planet. There's only a very small number of species that provide the vast number of calories for humankind. Things like rice and corn that you've heard about and you're familiar with. But that's a very risky strategy for a planet to depend on a small number of species. We think it's really critical to develop new diversity in crops. And the picture you see of that weird looking plant is actually a perennial grain. So when we grow wheat or we grow corn or we grow rice, we have to plant it every year. This grain grows year after year after year. It's a really interesting crop called kernza, and maybe you'll hear a lot more about it in the future. Another area of real excitement is what we call the microbiome. So these are all of these bacteria and fungi that live in and around plants. And the picture you see at the bottom, the green, is actually a fungus that's living inside the roots of an alfalfa plant. And without that fungus, the alfalfa plant can't get enough phosphorus to survive. There are many, many, many thousands of these kind of associations that we barely understand in the plant world. And these are going to be extremely useful for agriculture. There are many, many startups in this country, startup companies that are already in this microbiome space. And we make proposals to really expand and enhance our understanding of how these relationships work and how they can be taken advantage of to create these new crops and more resilient crops. I don't think there, thank you very much. So in the Decadal Vision, we spent a lot of time in the summit talking about moonshots. What's something today that would be unimaginable, but we believe that something will cause this to be possible? These are things where we think our reach should exceed our grasp. And some of them are perennials, new perennials like the one I showed you on the previous slide. But many plants, it's very disruptive to the soil. It's very, it uses a lot of gas. It creates a lot of emissions. It's a lot of labor to plant crops every year. How can we move towards perennialization in crops that we now grow annually? What about polycultures? There's very old polyculture technology. We've all heard of the three sisters from our Native American forerunners, the squash, the corn, and the beans. But polycultures are something that hold enormous promise for the future because it's better use of land, but it's complicated from a technical point of view and from an agricultural point of view. And we believe that polycultures are a frontier that should be very, very heavily explored in the future. And we offer, again, our ideas for that moonshot. And lastly, the water habit. Plants just seem to use too much water. We use a lot of our water that is extracted from the ground, a very high proportion is put to agriculture. It gives us wonderful things to eat, but it's not sustainable, especially with climate change. So how can we create plants that use a lot less water, but still have the properties, the nutritional properties and the other properties that we value? So there's also information on the Breaking the Water Habit moonshot. Oh, I guess my slide changer is working. And now a third area that's really also very exciting is what we call health and well-being. So many of our medicines, our most common medicines, are actually derived from plants. And at the bottom left, you see this chemical structure of Taxol, which was originally extracted from a yews, the tree, and were found to be an effective treatment for breast cancer. So plants are the sources of dozens of medicines now, but there are thousands of more potential medicines. Plants are chemical wizards, and we barely know anything about most of the chemicals they produce. Plants can also be programmed as factories. And when there was an Ebola outbreak a few years ago, the ZMapp antibody was made in tobacco plants. So rather than making tobacco that's bad for you, in fact, the tobacco plants were turned into molecular factories. And finally, I have a picture here that's actually from a baseball stadium in Arizona of what we call green infrastructure. There's vertical gardens, there's urban gardens, there's rooftop gardens, and plants bring joy to us. They can also be useful, and people in urban environments can learn new ways to feed themselves. And again, the plant varieties that are needed to do that are ones that are going to be developed over the next decade. Go ahead, please. Now, I mentioned at the very beginning that we're interdigitating research, people, and technology. And this slide is about one of our people goals. Now, the PSRN, this coalition that's putting on this webinar, had a workshop a few years ago, and we put out a report in 2017 on our view of reimagining the scientific workplace. Academia hasn't changed a lot, nearly as much as it needs to for the future in our way of thinking. And that icon you see on the left is what we call putting trainees in the center, putting trainees, that is, the early career researchers and the students and the postdocs, in control of their own futures. We want to provide a support network, which is some of the jigsaw puzzle pieces, and we want to supply them with money to make choices, informed choices about their careers and their own futures. We also emphasize the diversity that is currently lacking in STEM and in the sciences that we need to have for the future. We had another workshop on that topic that was mentioned in one of Sam's slides in January of last year, and that report is also under development. And of course, in the national environment now, we're having a lot of conversations about diversity. And I think the plant science community showed ahead of time, if you will, that we want to be part of this. And we want to help change the way science views diversity and the way it incorporates it. And to us, the scientific culture is one of the most important elements of that required change. I think we're both changing slides here. In terms of technology, technology always surprises us. Things that we wouldn't think were possible all of a sudden are commonplace. So for example, we don't have drones on this slide. Well, we probably would have had them on there 5 years ago in our last decadal vision. We had drones, but now they're everywhere. They're flying over everybody's field, and they're giving us incredible amounts of information. But look at this corn leaf down in the lower right corner. This plant is actually wearing a sensor. Wearable sensors that tell us, the plant can tell us what it's feeling. Is it thirsty? Is it hungry? Is it cold? Is it hot? Is it stressed? Is it crowded? What is it thinking? Has it got a pest on it? And if you think about a field of plants all reporting their feelings, you'll find out that not every part of a field is feeling the same thing. And how do you take all of that information? How do you integrate it computationally? How do you react to it? What are the tools we have to take advantage of all this information? So this data problem is twofold. One is we have incredible opportunities to obtain information from the environment, from our agricultural fields, from our experimental plants, but we have to then deal with that information. And I started learning new words. I'd heard of a petabyte, I'd never heard of a zettabyte. But now when we talk about information flow globally, we're in the zettabyte era. That is a huge amount of information. And if you're as old as me, you remember back when a megabyte was too expensive to buy. So we are in an information revolution. It's growing exponentially. The amount of knowledge is tremendous. But what are we doing with that information? What are we doing with all the sequences, with all the sensor output? We need ways of using that information to our advantage. We need artificial intelligence. We need people who understand how to use artificial intelligence. We need the computational biologists. We need the engineers. So plant scientists are not just working with plants. They're working with information. They're working with engineering technology and other technologies. And again, as we get people aware of plants, as we try to get them excited about plant science, they need to understand that all of these fields and more are part of the future of plant science. So to close, there's two last quick slides. Why do we need a decadal vision? What are the opportunities? What are the challenges? We have climate change is a huge challenge. So it puts stress on our water resources. It makes the weather less predictable and so on. We have a growing population, not so much in our country, but around the world. And we have a role to play to making sure not just that we can feed everyone, but that we do so in a sustainable way for the future and health of our planet. And then we also noticed most recently during the COVID pandemic that sales of plant-based meats are skyrocketing. People's tastes are changing. And I think plant science is going to have a big role to play in the way people choose their food and what they want to eat. We need to develop the things that people want and need to find satisfaction in their lives and to believe they're doing the right thing by the planet. And on the right, you have a picture showing different areas of impact. So plant science aside, plant agriculture is a huge export engine for this country. It provides thousands and thousands of jobs, billions of dollars of economic impact, and it's absolutely critical for human health and for the environment. So there are lots of reasons to care about plant science beyond how plants work. So our community, our plant community, is committed to pursuing our decadal goals. We were ambitious, we want to be productive, and we want to be fair. We want to have diversity and equity inside of plant science. In return for that commitment, we look for your commitment to support our work. Plant science isn't free, and we think it's an extremely valuable use of federal resources, private resources, any resources. We want people to talk about the future of plant science, and we want the support for plant science so we can get people excited and help them to ensure the future sustainability of our planet. And that is all I'm going to say. I hope that we have some questions and that you've enjoyed hearing a little bit about the emerging Plant Science Decadal Vision. Natalie, I think you're muted.
We can't hear you, Natalie.
Thank you, Dr. Stern, for that great presentation. I'm giving you a virtual round of applause here.
Okay.
So now it's your turn to our audience. We have Dr. Stern and Dr. Miller available to answer your questions. You can deposit these in the chat box in the GoToWebinar control panel. We have a few questions that were submitted previously, and so maybe I will start with this. So Dr. Stern, how do you envision agriculture and horticulture being grown in a sustainable way to support food and medicinal purposes of plants? How can we move towards a more sustainable plant production system?
Yeah, I mean, I think when people talk about sustainability, and I'm sure Sam has a better answer than me, we think about land use and we think about resource use. So how much can we produce with the least number of inputs? And plants are really smart, but nature has evolved them, or we've domesticated them for particular purposes. Sustainability has never been at the front of our breeding strategies. Now with all the tools we have, we can do this. So I think a lot of attention is turned to creating germplasms, plant species and crops that will serve that purpose and not solely be grown because of a size or a smell or a taste. We can do all those things at the same time with modern tools. Sam?
I completely agree. And I also think, much in the same way that you see in a developing economy, they don't have telephone poles because they all go straight to a mobile device, right? When you look at why we grow the crops that we do on the limited acres that we have within our borders, we grow those because those are the crops that we have markets for and we have equipment to handle, and that we can secure an income year in and year out, right? So that's why farmers are tax-based. That's why farmers are always going to be a crucial part of what we do. And so what I look forward to is expanding our options into things that we don't even foresee through these emerging technologies, through this new discipline that we're going to see, through taking useful pieces from lots of different species and being able to synthesize an organism that can serve our purposes while also servicing our local ecology. I think that's going to be really fascinating, and I am so grateful to that. Hopefully, good Lord willing, I'll live to see a little change. That being said, I do think that we continue to invest in getting better in producing the row crops that our nation is known worldwide as a source of high quality and safe feed and food products. So I have nothing but hope, and I'm excited that we have folks who want to actually do the science, and they are supported in doing so, like Dr. Stern and his lab.
Thank you. Let me just add one last thing. I mean, 5 years ago, would you have foreseen new hemp industry in this country? Would you have foreseen, Burger King selling a plant-based burger and having it be a bestseller? So when we say that nothing's going to change, we only have to look back a few years and we have to realize how far we've come and what the potential is.
I mean, if you look back 50 years ago, our most important protein crop and our second most abundant on acres, right? 50 years ago, soybeans were a hay crop. And today, look at the marketing powerhouse that we have around them, and we've found ways to use that protein. So I'm excited. It'll be fascinating, and the only way we're going to get to a more sustainable and ecologically sound future is by continuing to invest in the basic research that secures those as options.
Well, thank you for those answers. We have a couple of questions that have been submitted in the chat. And just as a reminder, we are not going to be calling on people. So if you'd like to ask a question, please put that into the chat. First off, at the beginning of your presentation, Dr. Stern, you discussed biodiversity and ecology. We have a question that asks, are there any recommendations on how to use diversification in agriculture, or how to speed up domestication in our shift to identifying crops that are related to consumer preferences?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And one of the most exciting things about the growth of the Plant Science Research Network has been the Ecological Society of America joining and really contributing strongly. So in the Plant Summit, we had voices that we hadn't had in the past talking about plants in agriculture doing carbon sequestration, for example, or talking about the potential of learning from species that grow in extreme environments. So the genetic pool that is best understood by evolutionary biologists and ecologists can then be put to the service of our agricultural colleagues as they engineer or move these traits into plants. One of the big areas is taking wild relatives. If you've ever seen a wild banana, you would never want to eat it, but that banana might be really resistant to disease. The same thing is true in watermelons. If you look at wild watermelons, you would never want to eat one. They're the size of olives. Same thing with tomatoes and so on. So all of our agricultural crops have wild relatives with very interesting properties because they grow in different types of non-farm environments. They haven't been domesticated. So learning about those genes and then putting them into our crop plants is something that can be done with increasing sophistication. That's why predictability is a lot of the Decadal Vision's goals. If we learn about plants, if we learn how they're wired, how they work, we can predict the outcome of an experiment. Before, it was more like, what is it with pesticides? They say spray and pray. We don't want to, genetically cross and pray anymore. We don't need to do that. We can predict much better the results. I mean, it still takes a year to grow some crops. I mean, we haven't figured out how to speed all of that up, but there are kinds of corn that mature in 6 weeks. They're too small to eat, but we only have to look around us, and it's mostly been trying to understand how to take this diversity that we already know about, that the ecologists especially know about, and use that knowledge in agriculture. And the tools of gene editing, the tools of molecular breeding, and the awesome computational power of plant informatics is what's going to get us there. Sam, you probably have some thoughts as well.
I would echo your sentiments. I think when we think about the enormous diversity that surrounds us each and every day, I mean, even those of us who are trained in plant sciences and we really, appreciate the diversity that's there, we're still learning, and there's so much left to see. And like you said, we don't know what the opportunities are until we explore, categorize, and understand what that diversity is. And then we can look at the next iteration, which is how do we integrate the useful attributes of each of those into something productive. So absolutely, it starts with the basic.
Thank you. So we have a couple of questions about new tools and technologies like gene editing and synthetic biology. And in particular, they're wondering how that can be applied to phytobiomes research or microbiomes research. Would you be able to expand on that a bit, Dr. Stern?
I'm not really an expert in that area, but I will say that the microbiome is really interesting. So these are bacteria that live in and around plants, or fungi that live in and around plants. And the phytobiome also includes things above ground. But if we just keep it simple and think about things that interact with the root, the same bacteria will sometimes interact with the same species in one place, but not another place. Maybe it's the soil, maybe it's the genetics, we don't know. What is the genetic conversation and the chemical conversation between microbiomes and plants? So these are things that, again, to Sam's point, that people in the laboratory have been studying really intensively for the last decade or so, and they're starting to learn the properties of simple systems. Let's say one bacterium and one plant, like the picture I showed you of a fungus and a plant. but microbiomes come in the thousands of species. Many of them can't be grown in the laboratory. We have developed and our need to develop more ways of studying microbial communities and how they interact with plant communities. So these are really complicated problems, but it's the way nature actually works. Even in a farmer's field, it's not so simple. A plant is really a community of organisms. You may have heard that for every one of your human cells, you have 50 bacterial cells in your body. Now, plants are no different. Bacteria and fungi live in and around them, and life wouldn't be the same without them. So understanding those interactions is key, and there certainly is a genetic component. So if we find out that a plant needs gene X in order to harbor a microbe Y that makes it grow better, then we can put that gene X into another species and attract the microbe. So a lot of it's going to be chemistry, and the chemistry is going to be related to genetics. And I hope that's at least a partial answer to your question.
And we see on my end, so our company is not basic in research. However, we do extensive research on how we can help farmers be more profitable. And we see now those products are coming to market, Dr. Stern. We're testing 3 different products that are microbial associations for corn that will help that corn plant to harvest and tap into environmental nitrogen. And we all know that nitrogen fertilizer is a great tool without which we could not be as productive as we are. However, it comes with associated environmental risks. But we're able to partner our corn plant with specific strains, whether they're fungal or bacterial, that can help that plant to access more environmental nitrogen. And so we're putting that to use on our acres here in central Indiana today.
That's awesome. And I did mention there's a lot of startups in that space, but I think it's the tip of the iceberg. And it's really great to see it out in the field at the same time because it's proof of concept. Absolutely.
Thank you. We have a question about the role of plant epigenetics and how it can help to achieve our decadal vision. Dr. Stern, would you like to start by responding to that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and it certainly came up at the Plant Summit. So we have genetics, sort of the brown eye, blue eye, tall plant, short plant. That's the genetics that we're taught in school, the Mendel genetics, as we call it, the P's, whether they're wrinkly or smooth. Epigenetics is kind of like decorations on genetics that have only been really understood at a molecular level in the last 10 or 20 years. How much epigenetics can be used to modify crops, I think is still an open question. I know there's a very interesting company. I know the people in it who have some fascinating results from the fields to say that epigenetics could be one of the keys to increasing plant yield. And I think it points to this idea that there's no one technology or approach that's going to solve all these problems. We need a toolbox, a big toolbox with a lot of different tools. And epigenetics is going to be one of them. I think it's partly just a fascinating biology curiosity in all biology, not just plant biology, but it's partly a way of programming plants in a way that is fundamentally different than crossing two together and hoping to get the average or hoping to get the best of both worlds. So it was discussed. It's not a big thing in the decadal vision, but it's certainly an important topic.
Can I change the conversation towards federal support for this research? We have a couple of questions. One of them being, what is the role of federal agencies such as NSF, USDA, DOE, and NIH in advancing plant science? Dr. Miller, would you like to start?
Sure. So the role is we need reliable and robust funding. And so we cannot do these undertakings, as Dr. Stern already referenced. These are oftentimes species that simply have a longer life cycle. This isn't something that we can complete in an annual way. And so we need really that robust funding that's going to go year to year and be able to support something. So be able to support a lab, being able to support a program. Each of these scientists that we're hoping to hire in the future is going to need support for some sort of university training over the course of 4 years or 8 years or 12 years, depending on their level. And so I think the role of the federal government is to look at that basic research and say, how can I supply this? How can I support this research? How can we continue to set the pace as a nation in determining, establishing, and constructing this body of knowledge in such a way that companies like mine and others and other startups can leverage that basic research that was federally supported to make a big economic impact. We simply cannot fund all of this privately, nor should we. We should understand that it is a public good and that it's very good for our economy and for our future as a competitive nation to understand these things and to work collaboratively as we do that.
And I would just, I agree with all of that. I would say that all the 4 agencies mentioned are what we call mission agencies. So energy, agriculture, health, and NSF is unique because its motto is where discoveries begin. So that's a basic research agency. But one of our main goals is plants and human health. And that would be great for NIH, and they already support that area. Photosynthesis, how plants use light, that's DOE and so on. But I think the greatest advances have come when those federal agencies have worked together, or they've worked with private partners, with the Gates Foundation, for example, or there's the Foundation for Food and Ag Research, a private-public partnership. Those are the way of the future. We believe that partnerships will offer the keys where because of the complexity of science, not one agency is enough to solve a problem. A big, complex, interesting problem is going to require collaboration among different disciplines, and the funding should probably be collaborations among different resources.
Speaking of those collaborations, Dr. Stern, you mentioned a few moonshot ideas. How do you envision federal agencies supporting and coordinating those efforts?
Yeah, this is really interesting because, federal agencies, particularly, DARPA is an example, ARPA-E is an example, NSF is an example. They want to support risk-taking. They tell scientists, bring your crazy ideas because we know that most of them will fail to pan out, but every once in a while we're going to hit gold, and that's what's really going to catalyze big changes in our field. And then there's this process called peer review, where people send in proposals to be reviewed, and all the scientists are risk averse in those panels, and they pick things that they see as sure bets. So this has been a constant tug of war, but I think the agencies do a good job of pulling out certain projects that they view as high risk, high reward, and supporting them. And I think it's going to be a part of their portfolio. I mean, quite honestly, projects that seem to be low risk often have surprises embedded in them. Just shows how little we understand about biology. But I think a balanced portfolio of high risk, high reward, and things that we just need to build, the bricks we need to build that foundation of knowledge, is probably the right way to go in the future.
So we have about 5 minutes left in our session. So if you have any late-breaking questions, please submit them there. Maybe I can pose a different kind of question, which is, what is the thing that we haven't discussed today that you're most excited about with this decadal vision? I'll give you a second to think about that. Dr. Miller, would you like to begin?
I get very excited, if you can't tell, when I think about the power of bringing all of these different scientists together. And that may be because simply my training and my work experience has been focused on production agriculture. And I can't tell you how much I learned in 3 days during the Decadal Vision, the Plant Summit, from listening to ecologists and chemists. And someone sat down at breakfast and said, "Hi, I'm an oxen person." And I said, "Let's talk, right? I'm sure, growth, let's go." So I think that there's incredible power and there's incredible diversity of thought in this space. And the fact that we were able to take that entire spectrum of experience and emphasis and passion and really drill that down and distill it into something that's tangible and say, these are the 7 things we all want to work on. These are the 7 things that we all are going to dedicate our vocations to. I think that is incredibly powerful, and I'm very excited to watch what comes out of this, knowing that the folks that were in that room are simply samples from a population, and that there's so much more passion and so much more enthusiasm for the sciences that's happening outside of those walls. So I'm simply excited that this exists. I'm excited that folks are going to take this forward, and I'm excited to see it be supported by our federal partners as well.
Dr. Stern?
Yeah, well, I think two things have excited me. One isn't just specifically about the Decadal Vision of Plant Summit, but really everything we've done with the PSRN, and that's the hope that the earlier career, the younger people give me. Some of our most incredible ideas have come from people who maybe haven't always had an opportunity to participate in these kind of events. Natalie's Exhibit A here. It's been great to watch her take charge of the PSRN. But many, Katie Rogers, who's behind the scenes here, is another one who came to one of our workshops. So if you ever get discouraged about the future, surround yourself with people early in their careers, and you will be excited because they are full of dynamism, they're full of ideas, they don't know the boundaries that some of us know from earlier generations. So that's one thing that's, maybe it's just my age, but it's one thing that they got me real excited. A second is, and again, I don't know if this is just because of my age or my career stage, but the idea that we're calling for systemic change, that we're calling to change the research culture, the way we think about our trainees and early career researchers, the way we think about how science should be performed. And if you delve into some of the other PSRN reports, you'll see more on that. I find that to be really exciting. I think the idea that you can be revolutionary inside the status quo, to me, is oxymoronic. I don't think you can do it. So I think if you want to change the way that science happens, if you want to change the way that we can access the different disciplines of science and fuse them together to integrate them, you have to change the infrastructure of science. And that's why I'm so excited that Decadal Vision takes a very broad view. It's not just the science, the experiments, the crops, the knowledge, but it's how we attain that knowledge and the systems that we use to attain it. You're muted, Natalie.
Oh, thank you very much. Our last question that was just submitted is about sharing out the Decadal Vision. One of our attendees is a representative from a commodity organization and is interested in sharing this out with non-scientists. So David, how do you envision the PSRN sharing this message with all different stakeholders? And will we be able to provide resources for those groups?
Natalie, I think you're by far the best person on the screen to answer that question.
That's what I was thinking.
All right. Well, I apologize for throwing that your way. So yes, our goal is to share this out with all stakeholders. The Decadal Vision document that Dr. Stern mentioned will be published is written for a plant science audience, and so it is focused on scientific content. But we would like to share this out with all groups, including people from the federal government and other policymakers, as well as those interested from commodity groups, and including people that are educating the next generation of plant scientists. So yes, we have your contact information, and we will be sending follow-up messages when the report is finalized and when those materials are available. So thank you for that question. And
I would just add, Natalie, yeah, we're developing a series of some subcommittees are developing some position papers that are written, I would say, in more non-jargon language. And also, you saw one pager today. We did that a bit quickly. We want to have information that's accessible and focused for people. That's super important for people who don't want to read the whole report. But even in the report, it's not all highly technical. We've tried to write it for a broad audience. We had to tug of war about that too at the summit. Some people wanted to write it for other scientists. I think the majority wanted to write it for the community around us as well. Sam, anything to add?
I'm all about accessible language. So those of us who work in the marketing department shy away from jargon. So I'm excited that we'll be sharing this broadly and look forward to feedback and input and collaboration with those commodity groups.
Thank you. That's well said. So we are coming to the end of our time. So I just want to remind everybody that there is another seminar in this series. So watch your email for an invitation on Monday, June 29th will be the next seminar titled Impacts of COVID-19 on Food and Agriculture Markets. And this will conclude our presentation today. And as we mentioned, we're interested in your feedback, so please feel free to respond by email to us. Thank you for joining our webinar today.
Thank you.